In the middle of a typical shopping trip at Target, something shocking unfolded that no one could have predicted. It all started like any ordinary day, shoppers strolling the aisles, grabbing what they needed, and a sense of calm filling the air. But this day would be different. What was meant to be a simple visit for a few essentials quickly turned into a confrontation that would escalate beyond anyone's wildest imagination. It all began when a black woman, simply trying to enjoy a peaceful afternoon, found herself the target of a ruthless and hurtful outburst. As she pushed her cart through the aisles, a woman, who would later become infamous for her behavior, approached her. What happened next was not just an unfortunate encounter, it was a full-on public spectacle that left witnesses in disbelief and shock. The woman, often referred to in these situations as the Karen, began with a snide remark. What started as a simple judgment over something trivial would quickly escalate into a racially charged public humiliation. The black woman, trying to mind her own business, was subjected to loud accusations, rude comments, and blatant disrespect. She was caught off guard, but what happened next would take this encounter far beyond anything anyone could have predicted. For a moment, it seemed as though no one would step in. The situation hung in the air, thick with tension. Shoppers paused, unsure of how to react. Some looked on nervously, others seemed too uncomfortable to intervene. And yet, despite the ugliness of the moment, something unexpected began to unfold. The black woman, instead of retreating or backing down, stood her ground. In the face of this public shaming, her response was more powerful than anyone could have imagined. What started as an embarrassing altercation for her soon turned into something that caught everyone off guard, and it would soon become clear that she was not alone in this fight. Now, you're probably wondering, what happened next? How did this situation evolve from a simple confrontation to something that would capture the attention of millions? What happened in those critical moments that would shift the power dynamics in this very public exchange? Stay with us as we dive deeper into what transpired in the aisles of Target, because what happens next will shock you. Maya stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest as she watched the back and forth between the man and the woman unfold. It was as if everything had shifted in an instant. What had started as a single confrontation had now drawn in an unexpected third party. And not just any third party, but someone who was willing to call out the racism that had been directed at her. The woman, clearly rattled by the man's sudden intervention, looked like she didn't know how to handle being challenged. She'd been in control for the last few minutes, spitting insults and passing judgment, but now, the power dynamic was changing. The man stepped closer to her, blocking her path and forcing her to look at him directly. "Do you even realize what you're saying?" he asked, his voice steady but cutting. "Or do you think you have the right to treat someone like that just because you think you can get away with it?" The woman scoffed, her face red with embarrassment and anger. "What do you know about anything? You don't know me," she spat, trying to regain control of the situation. But her words lacked the certainty they had just moments before. Maya felt a strange sense of relief wash over her, but it was short-lived. The tension in the air was thick, like a storm about to break. As the man and the woman continued to argue, Maya noticed other shoppers starting to pay attention. Some were pulling out their phones, others looking nervously from the edges of the aisle, unsure if they should intervene. There was a sense of discomfort hanging in the air, but no one was willing to step forward, except the man. Maya's mind raced. She couldn't help but wonder what would happen if this confrontation escalated. What if the woman started yelling for store security? What if this turned into something much bigger than a petty argument over who belonged in the store? She couldn't afford to let herself be dragged into a scene that might spiral out of control. Her kids were at home, waiting for her. She had things to do. But she also knew she couldn't just walk away, not now, not after everything this woman had said. Still, Maya was torn. She was grateful for the man's intervention, but she didn't know him. Could she trust him? Was he truly on her side, or was he just looking for a fight, too? There was always the possibility that things could spiral in a different direction, one she wasn't prepared for. The feeling of being judged, dismissed, and targeted was all too familiar, but it had never been this public, this open. Meanwhile, the man wasn't backing down. He was relentless, confronting the woman's every word with calm precision. "You think you can say whatever you want because of what you assume about people. But that's the thing with assumptions, you're almost always wrong." The woman's jaw clenched. She glanced around, her eyes darting to the small crowd that had gathered. "This isn't your business," she snapped, clearly uncomfortable under the scrutiny of so many people. "I'm not talking to you." "Actually, you are," the man replied. "Because what you're doing is wrong. You can't just walk up to someone and start judging them based on their skin color. That's not how things work anymore." Maya could feel her anxiety starting to shift toward something else. There was still a part of her that didn't want to get involved, but there was also something inside of her that was waking up, something that had been quiet for too long. She was tired of letting people like this woman walk all over her, tired of keeping her head down to avoid conflict. She'd been doing that for years, for the sake of her kids, for the sake of her own peace of mind. But at this moment, as the crowd of people looked on, she couldn't ignore the sense that something needed to be done. Maybe not for her, but for everyone who had ever been in her shoes. The woman's face twisted into an expression of fury. "You don't know anything about me," she yelled, her voice rising. "You don't know what I've been through." The man raised an eyebrow. "I don't need to know your life story to know that what you're doing is wrong," he said, his voice unwavering. "You're treating someone with disrespect, and that's the only thing that matters right now." Maya's thoughts flickered. The woman had said something that made her pause. "You don't know what I've been through." It was a familiar excuse that people often used when they were caught in the act of saying something hurtful. It was a deflection, a way of trying to justify behavior that couldn't be justified. But Maya also knew there was a deeper truth buried in those words. Maybe the woman's actions were rooted in something personal, something painful from her past. Maybe she wasn't just a racist for no reason. But that didn't matter. At least, not today. Maya took a step forward, her voice clear as she finally spoke again. "What you're doing doesn't just hurt me, it hurts everyone who has to watch this. And it's not okay," she said, looking directly at the woman. For a moment, the woman faltered. The smirk that had been plastered on her face faded, replaced by something almost resembling confusion. It was as if the woman hadn't expected to be challenged, not just by the man, but by Maya herself. But then the woman's expression hardened again. "You don't know me. You don't know what I've been through, what I've had to deal with," she said again, this time her voice trembling with a mix of defensiveness and anger. "So don't sit there and pretend like you understand." Maya felt a chill run through her. She didn't have to know this woman's life story to understand that this moment wasn't just about a shopping trip gone wrong. It was about something much bigger, something systemic, something ingrained. It was about the way people like this woman had been allowed to walk through life unchecked. Allowed to make assumptions and pass judgment without consequences. Maya opened her mouth, but before she could respond, a voice cut through the tension. "Is there a problem here?" A store employee had arrived, having apparently been alerted by the growing commotion. He was tall, with a uniform that barely concealed his unease. He glanced nervously at the crowd, then back at Maya and the woman. "Ma'am," he said to the woman, "I'm going to have to ask you to calm down." The woman's face flushed with anger, but she didn't say anything in response. Instead, he turned sharply and began to march toward the front of the store. Her heels clicked loudly on the tile floor, a final defiant sound that echoed through the aisle. Maya's eyes followed her, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The man, still standing in the aisle, turned to Maya. "Are you okay?" he asked, his tone softening just slightly. Maya nodded, but it wasn't enough to erase the unease she felt. The woman had left, but something told her this wasn't the end of the story. The situation had been diffused, for now, but Maya knew that something bigger was at play. How would the store handle it? Would the woman face any consequences for what she'd said? And how would Maya's community react when word of the incident spread? Her thoughts were interrupted when the man spoke again. "I didn't mean to put you in the middle of this," he said. "I just couldn't stand by and let her say those things." Maya looked at him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Thank you," she said, her voice a little shaky. "But you don't know the half of it." And just like that, the conflict hung in the air, unresolved. There was a silence between them now, one full of questions that neither of them had the answers to. What would happen to the woman? What would happen to Maya, and to the people watching? The answers were still uncertain, and the tension was far from over. What was clear, though, was that this wasn't just a random altercation. It was part of something much deeper, a cultural moment that would leave a mark on everyone involved. What would the next chapter hold? Maya stood in the middle of the aisle, her eyes following the woman as she stormed toward the front of the store. Her mind was racing, but there was a strange numbness settling in her chest. She wanted to feel relief, but she couldn't quite shake the feeling that this was far from over. The woman had left, yes, but the damage was done. The words she had thrown at Maya were still echoing in her mind, and though the store employee had arrived, he hadn't done much more than ask the woman to calm down. What would happen next? Would there be a confrontation with the store management? Would Maya be forced to explain herself, to justify why she didn't just walk away from the altercation? The man who had stepped in earlier was still standing near her, watching the woman leave, but he didn't say anything at first. Maya wasn't sure if he was waiting for her to speak or if he was just trying to gauge whether the situation had truly ended. She finally broke the silence. "That was a lot," she said, her voice coming out quieter than she expected. Her words felt like an understatement. It wasn't just a lot, it was an assault, a punch to the gut that she was still trying to process. "I don't know what I was expecting, but I didn't think it would go down like this." The man turned to face her, his eyes softening with sympathy. "I get it," he said, his voice low. "But sometimes, you just can't let things like that slide. People need to know that it's not okay to treat others like that. Not now, not ever." Maya nodded, but she felt the familiar weight of uncertainty creeping back in. The woman's words had been cruel, but so had the silence of the people around her. The people who'd seen it all unfold but hadn't stepped in. She wasn't angry at them, at least, not entirely. She understood the fear, the hesitation. In a world where standing up for someone often feels like the beginning of a battle you're not sure you can win, it's easier to pretend you didn't hear anything, easier to walk away. But it was different for her. She couldn't walk away. Not this time. "You don't think she'll come back, do you?" Maya asked, suddenly wondering if the woman would return with some sort of retaliation. What if she went to the store manager? What if she accused Maya of provoking her or making the situation worse? What if this spiraled into something bigger than she had anticipated? The man hesitated for a moment, then shook his head. "I don't know," he said, his brow furrowing. "But I wouldn't be surprised if she tried to escalate it. Some people think they can get away with anything just because they have a certain privilege." Maya felt the words hit her like a cold slap. Privilege. It was something she'd heard so many times before. But hearing it out loud in this context, spoken by a stranger who had stepped in when so many others had stayed silent, made it feel real in a way that was hard to ignore. She had always known that her skin color meant she was perceived differently, but this felt like a direct confrontation with the truth of it. "Do you think it's over?" Maya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man looked at her for a moment, his eyes dark with thought. "It could be," he said cautiously. "But with people like her, you never really know." Maya's stomach turned at the thought. Was this just the beginning of something bigger? Was it possible that the woman would come back, bringing a story of her own that painted Maya as the aggressor? Was that what she had been counting on the whole time? Provoking Maya into saying or doing something she could later twist and use against her? Before Maya could voice her concerns, she felt a tap on her shoulder. She spun around quickly, startled, to find the store employee standing behind her, looking uneasy. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me for a moment," he said, his voice polite but firm. Maya's heart skipped a beat. She glanced at the man who had helped her, but he didn't seem to be moving, as if waiting to see what would happen next. Maya's pulse raced. Was this it? Had the woman already reported her, spun some tale that would turn everything around? Was she about to be escorted out of the store, accused of causing trouble when all she had done was defend herself? "Is this about her?" Maya asked, her voice shaky as she motioned toward the front of the store. "I didn't do anything wrong." The employee gave a slight nod, his eyes glancing around nervously as if worried someone might overhear. "We've received a complaint, and we just need to make sure everything is documented properly." Maya felt a knot tighten in her stomach. This was exactly what she had feared. The woman had complained, and now Maya was the one being questioned, as if she were the one who had caused the problem. She looked over at the man who had stood up for her, but he was now stepping back, not wanting to get involved further. "Can you just tell me what happened?" the store employee continued, his tone shifting to one of mild concern, though it did little to ease the tension Maya felt. "We just need to make sure the incident is documented so we can resolve this." Maya took a deep breath. This was it. She couldn't let this turn into something that would haunt her. She had to stand her ground, even if it meant facing some uncomfortable questions. She couldn't let the woman's cruelty be brushed aside, swept under the rug just because of some manufactured story. She turned toward the employee and said, "I was shopping. A woman came up to me, started harassing me, calling me names, accusing me of things I didn't do." Her voice was steady, but inside, she felt the weight of every word. She wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was standing up for the countless others who had endured the same silent attacks, the same whispers in stores, the same judgment based on the color of their skin. "I didn't do anything wrong," Maya repeated, louder this time, as if to make sure her voice was heard. "She treated me like I didn't belong here. Like I was less than her. And when I stood up for myself, I didn't expect anyone to come to my rescue. But someone did. And now I'm here, being treated like I'm the one who caused a problem." The store employee looked at her carefully, his brow furrowing. He didn't say anything at first, but his eyes moved from Maya to the front of the store, where the woman had disappeared. "I'm just going to take a statement," he said finally. "It'll be okay. But you may have to wait here for a bit while we sort this out." Maya nodded, trying to hide the sense of dread crawling up her spine. She didn't know what was going to happen next. Would the woman come back with a full complaint, turning the tables on her? Would she be forced to leave the store, or worse, face the possibility that her side of the story wouldn't be taken seriously? She wasn't sure, but she knew one thing for sure: there was no turning back now. Whatever happened next, Maya had already made her stand. She wasn't going to let someone like the woman walk away without consequences. No tea anymore. The minutes felt like hours. Maya shifted uncomfortably, looking around at the growing crowd of people who had gathered near the front of the store, still buzzing with the energy of what had just transpired. There was no telling where this was going. But one thing was clear: the story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The store employee walked away, leaving Maya standing there, her mind racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that this whole situation was spiraling in a direction she couldn't control. The crowd that had gathered seemed to be dispersing, but the whispers didn't stop. Some people were still looking at her, some with curiosity, others with judgment. Maya could feel the weight of their gazes, and for a split second, it felt like the whole world was watching her, waiting for her to make a misstep. As the minutes passed, her thoughts grew darker. Was the store going to side with the woman who had caused all this? Was Maya going to be escorted out, publicly humiliated for standing up for herself? She had dealt with situations like this before: discrimination, microaggressions, the subtle ways people tried to make her feel less than, but this was different. This wasn't just some offhand comment. This was a full-blown confrontation, and she had stood her ground. But would it cost her? Then, just as she was lost in thought, the store employee returned, but he wasn't alone. The woman, the one who had started the whole mess, was walking behind him, her expression cold, her posture stiff. Maya's stomach churned. It wasn't over. The woman hadn't backed down. Instead, she had brought backup. "Ma'am," the employee said, motioning toward the woman, "this is the customer who was involved in the incident earlier. She's here to clarify what happened." The woman didn't say a word as she stood beside the employee, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Maya felt a wave of frustration rise within her. Was this really happening? The woman, who had started the whole thing, was now acting like the victim, while Maya stood there, forced to defend herself all over again. The employee looked between the two of them, then back at Maya. "If you could just give us your version of events again, it would help us with our report," he said, his tone more formal now. Maya swallowed hard, doing her best to keep her cool. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, her palms slick with sweat. She wasn't going to let this woman manipulate the situation. Not again. "I've already explained what happened," Maya said, her voice steady but edged with frustration. "She harassed me in the store. Called me names. Accused me of things I didn't do. And when I tried to stand up for myself, she wouldn't stop. She kept escalating it." The woman stepped forward, cutting Maya off with a sharp motion. "That's a lie," she said, her voice icy and venomous. This woman was acting suspicious the moment she walked in. I saw her lingering around, eyeing the merchandise. She looked like she was about to steal something, so I said something. Maya's blood ran cold. This was it. The woman wasn't just going to play the victim. She was accusing Maya of theft, of something that could potentially get her banned from the store or worse. The audacity of it took Maya's breath away. "I was not stealing," Maya said, her voice rising with the anger that had been simmering just beneath the surface. "I was shopping, just like anyone else. You targeted me because of the way I look. And now you're trying to make it seem like I'm the one at fault." The woman's eyes narrowed, and she stepped closer to Maya, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. "You can't expect to come in here and get away with whatever you want. People like you are always causing trouble. Always trying to take advantage of the system." The words hit Maya like a punch to the gut, but she didn't back down. She stood taller, trying to keep her composure even as her pulse raced. This wasn't just about a shopping trip gone wrong anymore. This was about something bigger, about the assumptions, the stereotypes, the racist mentality that so many people still carried around. It wasn't just the woman standing in front of her. It was a whole system that had been built to look the other way, to give people like the woman a free pass to judge and discriminate. "You're lying," Maya said, the words barely escaping her throat. "You're using your privilege to turn this around on me. I'm not going to stand here and let you twist the truth to fit your narrative." The woman's face turned bright red with anger. "I'll have you thrown out of here," she hissed, her voice full of venom. "You don't belong in this store. And I'll make sure everyone knows what you tried to do." Maya felt her chest tighten. This was it, the tipping point. The woman had no intention of letting this go, no intention of backing down. Maya wasn't just a random shopper anymore. She was a target, and the woman was going to do whatever it took to make sure Maya was the one to blame. Just as Maya opened her mouth to respond, she heard a voice behind her. "Excuse me, is there a problem here?" Maya turned, startled, and saw two uniformed security guards approaching. Her stomach dropped. This wasn't just about a confrontation in the aisle anymore. This was escalating. Fast. The store employee turned toward the guards, looking visibly uncomfortable. "We're just trying to sort out a situation between these two customers," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "One of them," he gestured to Maya, "has been accused of causing a disturbance." Maya's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't believe it. This wasn't just about a misunderstanding. It was about her being accused of something she hadn't done. She was being framed, and she was in no position to defend herself if the story wasn't going to be heard. The security guards didn't say anything at first, their eyes moving from the store employee to the woman to Maya. There was a long, uncomfortable silence that seemed to stretch on for an eternity. The woman stood there, looking smug, like she had already won. Maya could feel the heat of her anger bubbling up, but she kept herself in check. If this was going to be her fight, then she had to play it smart. "I was just shopping," Maya said, trying to hold her ground, her voice firm. "I wasn't doing anything wrong. This woman started harassing me, accusing me of stealing when I hadn't even done anything." The woman didn't flinch. Instead, she stared the guards down, her expression dripping with condescension. "I'm just a customer who was concerned about a potential thief," she said smoothly, turning the narrative against Maya. "I saw her acting suspiciously, and I didn't want her to get away with it." One of the guards stepped forward, his hand resting on his belt as he surveyed the situation. "Ma'am," he said to Maya, "could you step aside for a moment while we sort this out?" Maya felt the ground beneath her shift. She was being asked to step aside, to allow the woman's accusation to take center stage. The thought of it made her stomach churn. She wasn't going to just back down. Not now. "No," Maya said, her voice sharp. "I'm not going anywhere until this is resolved. I've done nothing wrong. This isn't just about me anymore. This is about what happens when people like her get to make decisions based on nothing but hate." The tension in the air was unbearable. It felt like the entire store was holding its breath, waiting to see which way the scales would tip. Would the guards believe the woman's accusation? Would they let Maya walk out of here with her head held high, or would they side with the person who had clearly manipulated the situation? Everything was hanging in the balance. And then, just as Maya braced herself for whatever was about to come next, the store doors swung open, and another figure stepped in. The crowd parted just enough to reveal a man with a badge, an off-duty police officer who was apparently there to shop. Maya's stomach dropped. She had no idea what his role in this would be, but it felt like things were about to get even more complicated. The store had become a battleground, and Maya had no idea which side the officer would take. Would this be the moment that turned everything in her favor, or was it the final twist in a situation that was about to spiral beyond her control? The moment the off-duty officer stepped into the store, Maya felt a chill run down her spine. The tension in the air thickened, and the murmurs from the surrounding customers grew louder. The woman, sensing the arrival of authority, straightened her back, her smirk widening as if she had already won. Maya could see it in her eyes. She thought this was her victory, the moment when everything would go in her favor. But Ya wasn't about to let that happen. The officer walked calmly toward the security guards, his eyes flicking briefly to Maya and then to the woman. There was a flicker of recognition in his gaze as he looked at her. He'd probably noticed the commotion. He wasn't just a bystander now, he was a decision-maker. And his actions would determine whether the situation would end in disaster or with some measure of justice. "What's going on here?" the officer asked, his voice steady but with a sharp edge to it. The woman immediately stepped forward, eager to lay down her version of the story. "Officer," she began, her voice dripping with a rehearsed tone, "I'm just trying to enjoy my shopping trip, but this woman—" She gestured toward Maya, her face a picture of faux innocence. "This woman started causing trouble. She was acting suspiciously, walking around the store, eyeing the shelves like she was planning to steal something. I did the right thing by speaking up." Maya's heart pounded in her chest as she listened to the woman's words, twisting the truth with every syllable. But she wasn't about to let her get away with it. She knew what she had to do. Maya took a deep breath, her voice steady but firm. "That's a lie," she said, cutting the woman off. "I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just shopping, and this woman approached me out of nowhere, accusing me of something I didn't do. When I tried to stand up for myself, she kept escalating it. She even called me names. She didn't want to listen. She just wanted to push me out of the store for no reason other than the color of my skin." The officer's gaze flicked from the woman to Maya, and for a brief moment, Maya thought he might just dismiss her. But then, something changed. The officer stepped closer to the woman, his tone sharp and direct. "Is that so?" he asked. "Because what I'm hearing is a bit different. You're saying this woman was suspicious and caused a disturbance, but from what I can gather, the only disturbance I see here is from you. You've got a history of making accusations based on assumptions. And that's not something we tolerate, not in this store, not anywhere." The woman's face twisted with shock, her eyes narrowing as if she had never expected to be challenged. She opened her mouth to protest, but the officer cut her off. "I've been watching you for a while now," he continued, his voice low but unwavering. "And this isn't the first time I've seen you causing trouble. I've been called in to handle complaints about you before. You've made allegations against other customers, creating trouble where there was none. Now, I'm starting to think there's a pattern here." The woman's face drained of color. Her smugness evaporated as the officer's words sank in. The crowd around them began to shift, murmurs of disbelief spreading through the store. Maya couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication, but there was still a knot in her stomach. This wasn't over yet. The officer turned back to Maya, his expression softening. "I'm sorry you had to deal with this," he said, his tone sincere. "I've seen enough to know that you weren't the one at fault here. In fact, I'm going to ask the store to remove this woman from the premises." Maya's heart skipped a beat. It was happening. The woman was being exposed. The scales were tipping in her favor, and the truth was coming to light. But before she could allow herself to fully relax, the officer's next words shocked her to her core. "I'm not just talking about being removed from the store," the officer said, his voice now laced with authority. "I've been asked to issue a formal report on your behavior, ma'am. We'll be reviewing all of the complaints against you. If this pattern of behavior continues, you could be facing more than just a ban from this store." The woman's face crumpled. For the first time in what felt like forever, her carefully constructed facade of control and privilege seemed to shatter. She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. Instead, she just stood there, seething with quiet rage, her hands shaking at her sides. Maya watched in stunned silence as the woman slowly backed away, her eyes darting between the officer and Maya. The woman looked like she was searching for some last shred of dignity, but none was to be found. She turned and stormed toward the exit, her heels clicking loudly against the floor, the sound echoing through the now silent store. Maya stood frozen for a moment, still trying to process what had just happened. The entire encounter, everything from the woman's harsh words to the looming threat of being thrown out of the store, had been flipped in an instant. It wasn't over yet, though. Maya knew this moment wouldn't erase all the hurt, all the tension, all the frustration that had built up over the course of this confrontation. But it was a small victory. A powerful one. The officer turned back to Maya, his eyes meeting hers. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice softer now. Maya nodded, her throat tight with emotion. I'm okay," she said, though the words barely escaped her lips. "But I'm not sure I'll ever be the same after this." The officer gave a small, understanding nod. "You shouldn't have had to go through that," he said. "No one should. And you did the right thing by standing your ground." For the first time in what felt like hours, Maya let out a slow breath. She looked around the store, noticing the lingering glances of the customers who had witnessed the confrontation. Some were still staring, but others were starting to look away, perhaps realizing that what they had witnessed wasn't just a random argument, it was something more. It was a reminder of the small, everyday battles that often go unnoticed, of the subtle ways in which people are treated differently. Maya had stood up, not just for herself, but for all those who had ever been silenced, who had ever been made to feel less than. But just as she thought the ordeal was finally behind her, the store employee returned with a small envelope in his hand. He looked apologetic, but there was something else in his expression, something that didn't sit quite right. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice hesitant. "I just wanted to let you know that, while we've removed her from the store, there's been an issue with the payment system. Apparently, your card has been flagged as potentially compromised." Maya's heart stopped. What do you mean? I just used it." The employee frowned. "I don't know all the details, but I'm afraid we're going to have to ask you to step aside so we can resolve this. It seems like there's been a mix-up with the payment." Maya's head spun. After everything she had just gone through, the confrontation, the accusations, the tension, it felt like this was the last thing she needed. She couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. But as she stood there, her mind racing, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. Was this just a coincidence? Or was there someone else pulling strings in the background, trying to sabotage her at the last possible moment? The store employee's face had been kind, but now it seemed guarded, almost apologetic in a way that didn't feel entirely genuine. As she followed him toward the customer service counter, Maya couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something far darker was unfolding behind the scenes. This wasn't just a random encounter. It was a fight that would leave its mark, a story that was far from over. The twist was only just beginning. Maya's mind raced as she followed the employee through the store, her thoughts tangled with the lingering tension of the earlier confrontation. The last thing she needed now was another complication, but something about the employee's sudden shift in demeanor left her uneasy. It didn't help that the crowd had mostly dissipated, and the store felt strangely quiet, as if everyone was holding their breath. The vibrant energy she had once felt in the aisles now felt distant, suffocated by the weight of what had just transpired. When they reached the customer service counter, the employee gestured for her to take a seat. He didn't look her in the eye as he began typing something on the computer, and Maya couldn't help but notice the nervousness in his movements. She crossed her arms, trying to control her frustration. Had the store really flagged her card just as she was about to leave? Was this another part of the woman's manipulation? It seemed far too convenient. "I'll just be a minute," the employee said quietly, not looking up from the screen. Maya nodded, though her patience was wearing thin. She had already been through too much today, and this was the last thing she wanted to deal with. She glanced around the counter, her gaze landing on the stack of papers on the desk, policies, reports, forms, and her mind briefly wandered to the thought of what she would do next. No matter how this was resolved, she knew she couldn't walk away from this experience the same way. The employee finally turned to her, his expression still apologetic but tinged with something else, something she couldn't quite place. "I'm really sorry for the inconvenience, but there's been a mix-up in the system. It seems your card was flagged because of some suspicious activity." He paused, and Maya could feel her stomach tighten. "However, after further review, I see that it was a mistake. Your payment is valid. There's no issue with your card." Maya blinked, her mind reeling from the sudden change in tone. A mistake? The situation had been handled so smoothly at first, she hadn't expected the employee to backtrack. Could it be that this was all a simple misunderstanding? Or was there something deeper at play? Her gut told her it was the latter. "Thank you," she said carefully, her voice low. "But I still don't understand why I was flagged in the first place." "What happened?" The employee hesitated before answering. It's not entirely clear. But I'll make sure to escalate the issue. I can assure you that it wasn't intentional. It's just a technical glitch." He gave her a weak smile, but Maya could see the discomfort in his eyes. "And as for the situation with the other customer, I'm glad it's been resolved." Maya wasn't convinced. It all felt too neat, too perfect, as if the whole scenario was designed to distract her from the bigger picture. The woman had been escorted out of the store, but something about the way the employee had handled her card flagged as suspicious made Maya wonder if she was still being watched, still being set up for something she didn't understand. She stood up slowly, her fingers curling around the strap of her purse. "I appreciate you clearing this up," she said, though the words felt hollow. "But I need to make sure this doesn't happen again." The employee nodded, still looking uncomfortable. "Of course. We'll make sure everything is resolved on our end." Maya forced a polite smile and walked away. But as she passed through the store, her mind stayed on the unresolved questions. Had the woman been acting alone, or was she part of a larger pattern of behavior? What had been the purpose of the card flagging? Was there more to this than a simple mistake? Her instincts told her that the strange timing of it all wasn't just a coincidence. When she reached the exit and stepped outside into the cool air, she finally exhaled a long breath, feeling the weight of the entire ordeal lift off her shoulders. As she walked to her car, her thoughts shifted back to the larger context of what had just happened. Yes, today had been intense. Yes, she had been accused and harassed for no reason other than who she was. But there was a deeper lesson here, one that Maya knew would stay with her far beyond the walls of this Target store. This was a story that wasn't just about her fight for fairness. It was about a system, about the microaggressions and assumptions that many people were still battling every day. The woman in the store had been brazen in her attempts to undermine Maya, but in the end, Maya had stood her ground. The store had sided with her, and the officer had spoken the truth. But Maya knew, deep down, that this wasn't the end of it. These kinds of confrontations, these kinds of biases, would continue to show up in different forms, in different places, in different faces. The truth was, this was just one chapter in a much bigger fight. Maya sat in her car for a moment, reflecting on how far she had come. She wasn't going to let this experience define her. She was going to take this strength, this clarity, and use it to fuel her next steps. There would be other challenges, other difficult situations, but now she knew what it meant to fight back, to speak out, and to demand respect. Her phone buzzed, pulling her back to the present. She glanced at the screen, and for a moment, her heart skipped a beat when she saw the name of a friend pop up. She quickly swiped to answer. "Maya, are you okay?" Her friend's voice came through the speaker, concern evident in her tone. Maya smiled softly, feeling the last of the tension slip away. "Yeah, I'm okay. Just a little shaken up, but I'm good now." "You sound stronger than ever," her friend said, the relief in her voice clear. "Tell me everything. What happened?" Maya took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the day start to settle in. She'd tell her friend the full story, the harassment, the tension, the confrontation, and everything that came after. But as she did, she felt a sense of closure. There was power in sharing, in speaking up, in letting others know that these situations didn't have to end with silence. She wasn't going to hide anymore. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. She knew that. But today, Maya had won. Not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever felt powerless in the face of injustice. She had faced down the ugliness of racism, the subtle bias, and the assumption of guilt, and she had walked out of it stronger, more determined than ever. As the conversation with her friend continued, Maya's mind turned to the future. She wasn't going to let this incident go. There was work to be done, voices to amplify, and changes to be made. But the journey had just begun, and Maya was ready to face it head-on. Today was just a small victory, but tomorrow? Tomorrow, she would be ready for whatever came next.